Hi YouTube, I'm joined by Blue Thunder Intercept, and this is what are we doing?
We are going to be sailing and recreating the Titanic's sinking. Hopefully, it'll be accurate to a point, but we'll go for an overview of the history of the Titanic. She was constructed back in 1910, and she would go through 2 years of sea trials until her maiden voyage in 1912. On her maiden voyage, 4 days into the maiden voyage, she struck an iceberg in the Atlantic a few hundred miles off of the coast of Nova Scotia and sank. There were 2,500 people on board before, and only about 750 survived the sinking. It would later be determined that the ship would have split in two, not intact like originally thought. So, basically, we are going to be recreating the sinking to or the most accurate as we can. So we're starting in Halifax and we're going to be moving towards ice field. And as you can see, there's an ice field right in front of us. Due to the freezing temperatures of the Atlantic at that time, the water was cold enough to basically freeze your body in at least 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And most passengers that entered, survivors that entered the water, were either froze to death or they were picked up by lifeboats and they suffocated or gained hypothermia due to being in the water for a certain amount of time. During the iceberg's collision, the Titanic struck the iceberg on the starboard side, and it was later determined that the hull was broken and ripped in the six watertight compartments. And it was said that Titanic could have survived if the first four were flooded. There were 5 or 6 compartments flooded, it would be a death blow for the ship. But due to the damage, she only sank in 2 hours and 20 minutes. It only took about 4 hours for the Carpathia to reach the Titanic's site where it sank and pick up the remaining survivors. So, basically, and now, since during these new documentaries, we've found out more about the ship, how it sank. We can determine that the ship split not at a 45-degree angle, but at a 30 to 32, 35-degree angle. At least. So that's basically the overview of how the history of the ship. But now we get into the accurate simulation of the sinking. So, Tornado, if you could go press X and go into the sinking modes.
It's already sinking.
It's not sinking. I don't know.
It's sinking by simulation, so it's playing the iceberg dead ahead. Oh, the port!
Oh. Yeah, hard to port. So after striking the iceberg, after the initial striking of the iceberg, was the First Officer Murdoch ordered a hard to port to steer the stern away from the iceberg, so that the propeller shafts would not be broken in. So not be broken and flood if the stern was equally damaged, the Titanic would have gone down level. Basically, it would have gone down level. So due to first officer,
This is the iceberg that struck the Titanic.
yeah, I can already see the semblance. But
Because it's the biggest iceberg in the game.
huh?
The reason I say that is because it's the biggest iceberg in the game. And it
Yes.
feel like it is. This is the perfect position right here. Right?
Yep.
Because
So
we just
basically-
struck the iceberg and
Yes. So, all those who don't know what really happened with the Titanic, basically, right after the initial collision with the iceberg, First Officer Murdoch ordered a hard to
everyone think the Titanic Easter egg badge.
nice. After the initial after the initial collision with the iceberg, First Officer Murdoch ordered a hard to port to steer the stern away from the ship. That action would later be great to limit the amount of time the Titanic took to sink. Because with very few watertight compartments flooded, it allowed for more time for the water to progress into the bowels of the ship. So,
Iceberg was not just one line. It was a couple, like multiple punctures. It struck about here, 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 all the way up to about here, I believe.
yes, and you can actually see that on the wreck.
Yes, you can.
And yep,
I'll pull up the photos of the actual wreck where the iceberg struck also.
yes, because the fact is that on the wreck you can actually legitimately see the outline of the punctures in the iceberg.
It's starting.
And
I hear a tsunami.
It's odd, but what's interesting about the stern,
Why is there a tsunami in the ice field?
I don't know, but let me say
Go ahead.
something. What's interesting about when the Titanic struck the iceberg, the passengers felt a jolt, like what in the world is that?
I think that's the spawn.
I think so too. But due to the initial jolt, people thought that one of the propeller blades had fallen off of the side of aft port side propeller, and it's actually shown in the photo, in one of the photos of the stern.
I'm gonna
where
go
it
to the
shows
grand staircase, which is right
the one
here.
that shows one, yep, it shows one of the sterns.
I'm just gonna go down
one
the
of the-
flights of stairs.
Yeah, but when it shows one of the propellers blades of the port side propeller actually are off, and there's a lot of controversy to the missing blade, as it's called.
People call this the fourth funnel a dummy. It kind of was, but that wasn't true. It still served a purpose. The smoking room fireplace, and so they could get fresh air into the engine room.
That, and it was also used for ventilation as well.
For the kitchen.
Yes, it was also used as ventilation as well.
The reason they needed that, the fresh air in the engine, if they didn't have the fourth funnel doing that, just like the Lusitania, I believe, there would be a lot of holes, like the pipe/holes sticking out.
Yep. So about the time that the angle of this, the simulation of the ship you can see right now, the passengers, one of the crew were actually giving out life preservers to the passengers aboard, like the lower decks, and most of the lower decks were being evacuated. Now, this time the most forward, the second compartment was almost fully floated at this stage, and that was due to the portholes and the open gantry for the boarding during the docking. It was opened so that the water can get ingress further. Alright. So, now, stress rockets were being launched. The captain sent the carpenter down to lower decks to examine the image of the ship. It would be later determined that the ship would take 2 hours to sink at most. That would increase in time to 2 hours and 20 minutes. So that's during the movie. 4 hours was the time given. It could have sank a bit slower, but due to the amount of water that was pouring into the ship, the water was rapidly filling the boiler room, engine rooms. Now, at this stage, with the angle of the ship in the simulation, water was starting to rise up on D deck, starting to pull up the stairs on C deck. The passengers were still scrambling for lifeboats. Lifeboats were being launched at this stage, and women and children were mainly the ones that would be sent off, and these lifeboats would be mainly half full. As you can see from this now, boats are being launched. So now, at this stage, water was reaching the top floor of C deck, making its way up to C deck and the forward compartments of the ship. Now, steam at this point, with the water starts reaching the lights below the nameplate of the ship, steam would eventually be released from the funnels. This would create so much noise that the radio operator, that was sending that the Coney operators operating the Marconi wireless system, sending us SOS, would later comment on the SOS that they couldn't hear for the noise of steam. Now, water, which was starting to reach the forward part of the ship, starting to reach the forecastle and almost reaching the nameplate. This stage, the ship was sinking a little faster due to some of the water starting to pour over the forwardmost bulkheads. Now, the people that were watching were in the
boat just goes straight through the Titanic.
Yes, but now the band that was on the ship started playing to keep the passengers calm. The captain ordered all of the crew members to evacuate the rest of the passengers, and eventually
here she goes.
Yep.
She's flooding.
And now, yes, at this stage, water was now pouring over the second, third, and fourth bulkheads. This would later prove to be a killing blow, as when the water was starting to reach the main mast, the ship would take a sudden jolt forward. Also, when it reached the bridge, it would start going down at such a rapid pace, people were running to the back of the stern.
Yep, you can really tell it's going faster now.
Yes, that's due to the air escaping from the compartments and the lower decks of the ship. Now, due to the amount of water the stress on the hull of the ship was becoming greater and greater at each angle.
It's the whole. It's the
Yep,
red port.
yes. Now, most of the now the boiler rooms were mainly underwater at this stage. The forecastle and uh, just starting to get the um, forward cranes were a forward cranes were about to go underwater. So now, with the amount of water that was covering the bow, these people that were on the boat deck were becoming more and more frantic each minute. The stern was rising out of the water at a considerable pace. The props were just veering out. They were just barely out of the water. Now, since this is sinking by simulation, the correct angle would bend to the port side at around 20 degrees, with the forwardmost tilt being 30 to 32 degrees just before the breakup. And now the electrical operators, the operators that were operating the lights, are trying to keep the lights on as long as possible so that people would have more
The
time
planet.
to evacuate.
You're to guard thee.
Yes, and since the band was playing, supposedly the band was playing this to keep passengers calm, and it worked for a little bit until the water started reaching boat deck.
She's
And
right here.
yep, that would be, I believe, A deck. Water's just going over A deck.
It's about to go through the bridge.
Yep, as it was reaching the bridge, the passengers
Oh yeah,
started
this
bolting.
thing is going down really fast.
Yes, because
It's noticeable now.
yes, the water was flowing over the bulkheads at such a rapid pace now, and water was going into the bridge. At this stage, people were frantically running for the back of the stern, and I believe with the amount of people that were heading for the back of the stern, the force, the weight of the people in the stern was stressing the hull as well. Now, at this stage, the ship would take a sudden lurch forward, and the bow would start heading straight down. And at around 2 a.m. on April 15th, 1912, the RMS Titanic would have its lights would be sinking at such a rapid pace. The stresses of the hull would be so great, and the water that was ingressing into the hull of the ship would greatly increase that stress. Now, this stage that you're seeing right now, this angle, peak stresses, the stresses in the hull were peaking. Peaking so great that the metal would start to bend and crack. And survivors aboard the lifeboats surrounding the ship would first see the lights immediately go flickering out. Then, because it was so dark, some survivors said the ship sank intact. But there's forensic evidence now that the ship did in fact split in two.
Oh, there it
And now,
goes.
at this angle,
Uh-oh.
lights blew out, and now 2 a.m. April 14th, 1912, RMS Titanic, at its peak stress, split in half, and eventually at 2:20, the stern would go under the waves. It took about 5 minutes for both parts of the ship to reach the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, as the bow heads down to the bottom, as you can see, it just hit the bottom, which is accurate. The bow would bend, the foremost part of the bow would bend, and you can see that in the wreck, and hopefully it will pop up a photo of how the foremost part of the bow was bent and is...
Yeah, it was pretty bent.
Yes. And now
the stern implodes, and since it has the bow has the front air, the water dynamic, the air, I forgot what's called, the bow doesn't. So as the water is forcefully going through it, as it's going down after the implode, it's going in forcefully and ripping apart the sides, the interior rooms away, and the decks.
Yes, and sadly, during the breakup, the promenade, one of the Parmesan Cafe and the promenade, as well as the library, actually broke up. And eventually they would be found, and I believe 2020 and 2021 during James Cameron's return, as well as Dr. Robert Ballard's return to Titanic, to find the missing pieces. So now, as the simulation, as you can see here, stern would rise vertically like James Cameron's movie. In real life, and due to the 2012 animation, Honor and Glory animation, the stern would have actually listed heavily to port side after the breakup and slipped beneath the waves at almost a 90-degree angle. So now, at this stage, water is rapidly ingressing into the stern, and air is rapidly releasing out of the very back of the stern as the air is being pushed out to the amount of water that's being ingressed. And now, at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912, the RMS Titanic slipped beneath the waves and out. And on September 1st, 1985, she would later be found resting. Supposedly, she would, due to the amount of time, she would have been said to have been sinking intact. It would later be found she was split in two. Now, as you can see, as the stern travels to the bottom, it rests upright, but it is not at the correct angle. The stern would have actually flipped over, being facing the west, the east.
This side, this end right here would be facing this.
Yes. That's because of the hydrodynamic forces. And now you can see, because she was so lonely that night, eventually she would be, the Carpathia would arrive 4 hours later, and too much too late. But at least she would have been able to pick up the passengers.
It has a Carpathia?
Yes,
when
it does.
Did they have this?
Not too long ago. Yeah. Now, as